I always believed that revenge was a weakness, something that belonged to men who couldn't move on. I used to tell myself that forgiveness was strength. But that was before they took everything from me. Before I realized that sometimes the only way to find peace is through destruction. It all started 2 years ago when my business partner, Ryan, and I launched our construction company from nothing. We were brothers in everything but blood, late nights, cheap whiskey, and the shared dream of building something real. We'd fought through failure together, or at least, that's what I thought. When the money finally started rolling in, things changed. Ryan became colder, distracted. He stopped showing up to sites, started taking mysterious calls. I chalked it up to stress. Until one day, a client called me asking why I'd taken a deposit from them when I had no idea about it. Turns out, Ryan had been rerouting deals, taking payments in my name, and pocketing the cash. Months of work were gone. Reputation ruined. When I confronted him, he just stared at me with that smug little smirk I'll never forget. "It's business, man," he said. "Don't take it personal." But that's the thing, I did take it personally. Because he didn't just steal my money. He stole my name, my trust, my years. And the worst part, he didn't stop there. He started dating my ex, Megan, the only woman I'd ever really loved. I didn't even find out until I saw them together at a mutual friend's engagement party. She looked at me like I was a ghost, and he had his arm around her like she was some trophy he'd earned. That night, I walked out before anyone could see the look on my face. I drove home and sat in the dark for hours. The taste of whiskey and humiliation burned my throat, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I wasn't just angry, I was alive in a way I hadn't been for years. I stopped thinking about why it happened and started thinking about how to end it. Ryan had always been confident. He thought he could bury me and walk away clean. But I was going to dig him up, piece by piece. The first step, make him believe I was finished. I started slow. Patience was the key. You can't just destroy a man like Ryan with anger, you have to make him do it himself. He had built a life on confidence, charm, and lies. Everyone loved him, trusted him, thought he was the golden boy who could make things happen. So, I decided to give him more rope. Enough to hang himself twice over. The first thing I did was send an anonymous tip to one of our biggest suppliers, claiming Ryan had been falsifying invoices. It wasn't entirely a lie. I just nudged the truth. Within a week, they froze all shipments. Ryan's projects started falling apart. He thought it was a clerical error. I watched from the shadows as he scrambled to fix it, calling people, begging them to move faster. Then, I went after his reputation. I created a new email under a fake name and started messaging our old clients, pretending to be a whistleblower. I sent proof of embezzlement, altered contracts, even fake screenshots of him admitting to fraud. It didn't take long for people to start whispering. Soon, investors started pulling out. Projects went cold. Employees stopped showing up. And Ryan, he started unraveling. I'd see his posts online, that same fake grin, pretending everything was fine. But behind it, I saw cracks forming. I could feel it. The same man who once stood over me with that smug smirk was now standing on the edge, his empire crumbling beneath him. But it wasn't enough. Revenge, I learned, is addictive. Once you taste it, you can't stop until you've had it all. So I went after Megan next. She'd left me when I was at my lowest, choosing money and comfort over loyalty. I didn't hate her anymore, but I wasn't going to let her walk away untouched. Megan had just started a small business, interior design, funded by Ryan's money. It was her pride and joy. I found her online reviews, her client lists, everything. Then I created a profile of Evelyn Turner, a made-up client looking to remodel a luxury home. For weeks, I strung her along with fake consultations, mock-ups, and promises of a big contract. She spent thousands preparing for it. Late nights, extra staff, new materials. Then, the night before the supposed deal was set to close, I sent her a single message. People always get what they deserve. And just like that, I disappeared. No explanation. No closure. The next day, her business page was flooded with bad reviews. Scammer, unprofessional, took my deposit. All fake, of course, but believable enough to hurt. By the end of the month, Ryan had lost to investors, and Megan had fired half her staff. They were both sinking, and neither had any idea I was the one holding the rope. But what they didn't know was that this was only phase one, because I wasn't done taking their money. I wanted to take their peace, their trust, their sleep, and I had just the plan to do it. I started posting pictures on social media of fake vacations, new ventures, smiling with people I barely knew. I wanted him to think I'd moved on, that I was distracted. Meanwhile, I quietly began reaching out to the people he'd wronged, employees, clients, even a few of his new partners. They all had stories, lies, missing payments, promises broken. And they all had one thing in common: they hated him. I didn't need to fight alone anymore. As I gathered their stories, something inside me clicked. I realized I wasn't chasing justice, I was crafting something else entirely. A symphony of payback. And Ryan, he was about to be the opening note. There's a sound that haunts you long after the theft, the soft, terrible creak of everything you thought was steady shifting underfoot. That was the sound of Ryan's life right then, a slow, relentless, like a ship settling onto rocks. Once the money and the contracts began to slip, I could have ripped the curtain open and let the world watch. But chaos is messy. It leaves collateral you can't control. So, I went quieter. I went for the things that live below the noise: his confidence, his instincts, the private conviction that had always made him untouchable. You learn quickly that confident men keep secrets written in small habits. Ryan always kept his phone on vibrate during meetings. He used the same coffee shop 3 blocks away, ordering the same black Americano every Tuesday at 9:15. He loved to rehearse his pitches in front of the mirror, and, ridiculous as it sounds, he always left his grooming kit at the same restroom stall at conferences. Little things that mean nothing to most people mean everything to someone like me. They are the pattern that makes a person predictable. I started to rearrange those patterns. One morning, a client called Ryan's cell and left a message asking him to follow up on an invoice. I made sure the voicemail didn't land where he would expect it. I routed it through a burner number that looked like a colleague. He heard it, thought someone else was stepping on his toes, and replied sharply, forwarding a terse email that was later brought up in a meeting as unprofessional. People notice the tone. People record tone. Then there were changes to logistics no one would suspect. I tampered with minor calendar invites, swapping meeting rooms so that a key investor would walk into a vacant conference and wait. I sent friendly, anonymous notes to staff: heads up, client's been asking tough questions, and watched panic ripple. Panic makes people reveal things they'd chosen to bury. The most cruel thing I did was make him doubt his own mind. A man who once trusted his instincts suddenly found himself apologizing for things he didn't do. I edited a file on a shared drive with a line of code that looked like a timestamp glitch. At first it was negligible, a misaligned column, a figure off by a decimal. Ryan, frantic, assumed he'd made the error. He stayed up nights combing through spreadsheets that showed nothing unusual. But sleep deprivation does something dark. It blurs memory, erodes confidence, forces even the most composed person to mistrust what they know. I fed it slowly. A misplaced note on his desk suggesting someone in accounting had made a change. A casual mention to a mutual friend that maybe Ryan should take a break. A copied screenshot of an old message where he'd bragged about a scheme edited enough to be plausible, ambiguous enough to seed doubt. People are quick to believe the plausible when they want an explanation for the collapse around them. When doubts accumulate, the mind scrambles for patterns. Ryan started seeing conspiracies where there were none. He accused loyal employees of betrayal. He snapped at suppliers who'd been patient for years. He hired lawyers who asked him the questions he most feared to hear. Each defensive move made him more isolated, more prone to mistakes. It was a terrible, elegant machine, self-sabotage dressed as self-defense. At night, I watched him from the window of my car when he didn't know anyone was watching. He'd sit in the driver's seat with his head in his hands, phone dark, world muted. Once, he drove past me slowing down as if testing whether the city itself had become slower, whether everything that used to be certain had been greased into uncertainty. I felt nothing and everything in that moment. He was crumbling, and a hollowness that resided in the ribcage of me obeyed the plan, but it wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. There was a calculated kindness to my pace. If I'd exposed him immediately and confronted him with the proof, he might have found a way to scapegoat, to call my motives into question. He might have used charm to rally sympathy. By letting doubt do the work, I made the world itself turn on him. People stopped siding with someone who can't be trusted to know his own actions. Then came the calls from people I'd roped in quietly, former subcontractors complaining about bounce checks, an ex-employee who remembered odd late-night transfers, a client who'd been billed twice for the same service. Each complaint arrived as a simple query into a ledger or a quick note in a thread, the sort of things that look administrative until you stitch them together. Once stitched, they mapped a different man than the one they'd known. Not a visionary, but an opportunist. I pushed further. I sent Ryan a text at 3 a.m. from a number he'd never seen. A short, blunt sentence, "You're going to lose it all if you don't fix this now." He replied with panic-tinged profanity and then silence. The next morning at the team stand-up, he overcompensated, forced laughter, too loud jokes, the man who laughs to avoid crying. You can almost see confidence fracture when it's performed. That day, he canceled to client dinners that had previously been surefire wins. As the doubt wrapped around him like fog, I took care to remain the man people expected me to be, available, rational, a voice of reason. People began to drift toward me with quiet questions. "Do you think he's okay?" they'd murmur, glancing at me like a jury testing my pulse. I answered with the same measured concern I'd shown since the first betrayal of a concerned friend, with a steady hand. That trust mattered. It was the scaffold on which the rest of the plan balanced. Not every action felt clean. Sometimes, late at night, I'd replay the moment I'd found them in my head. I'd taste the smoke of betrayal and the metallic tang of planning. A small, absurd part of me worried that I'd become what I hated: manipulative, cold, precise to the point of surgical removal of feeling. But then I'd remember the way Ryan had looked at me when he took the money, the way he'd laughed as if the world owed him allegiance. That memory steadied my hands. Doubt does not shatter a man in a day. It corrodes. It makes him question everything until he is a husk of decisions, too afraid to act without counsel, too afraid of error to trust his own gut. And when that husk begins to speak in interviews, to sign affidavits, to meet with lawyers, the world starts to listen to the ledger that points at him. That's when the slow justice I'd orchestrated turns into something irreversible. I watched the seed I'd planted grow into a vine that wrapped his life in thorns. The harvest was coming. I could almost taste it, not triumph, but the clean conclusion of intention. And yet, a whisper of something else had begun to enter the margins of my plans, an unease that perhaps the man I broke and the man I'd become would not be easily distinguishable. But that was a problem for later. For now, the doubt worked. And that was all that mattered. There's always a precise moment when revenge shifts from strategy to inevitability, when the target no longer resists, but simply unravels under the weight of everything he's lost. For Ryan, that moment came on a Thursday morning, in the middle of what was supposed to be a routine investor presentation. I wasn't in the room. I didn't have to be. I'd orchestrated enough of the conditions that I could practically script what would happen. The investors had been subtly primed. Each one had received a few concerned emails from contacts they trusted. Those emails hinted that Ryan's numbers were unreliable, that he'd been overpromising, maybe even falsifying a few small reports to maintain momentum. Nothing direct, just enough to make them alert for cracks. And cracks, when you look for them, are easy to find. Halfway through the presentation, Ryan's slides froze. The projector glitched, courtesy of a corrupted file I'd anonymously sent his assistant to help with formatting. He tried to improvise, stumbled, and started giving contradictory numbers. One investor cross-checked his data on a tablet and found inconsistencies. Voices rose. Questions turned sharp. Someone asked about an account that didn't exist anymore. Another asked why his last 2 invoices had bounced. The room turned on him like a storm changing direction. By the time he made it to his car, his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't fit the key in the ignition. I know because I was parked across the street, watching. He sat there, motionless, for a long minute. Then he slammed the steering wheel and screamed the kind of raw, primal sound you never forget. Rage, humiliation, despair. Everything mixed into one collapsing roar. That was the sound I'd been waiting for. The sound of a man realizing the walls had closed in. Over the next few days, the collapse accelerated. Ryan's board called an emergency meeting. His accounts were flagged for audit. Clients froze payments, waiting for clarity. Every email he sent sounded more desperate, longer, rambling, full of contradictions and misplaced apologies. Even his social media changed tone. The confident posts about growth and success were replaced with vague quotes about loyalty, trust, and second chances. That's how people reveal guilt, not by confessing, but by trying to rewrite the story before the ending arrives. Meanwhile, I made sure the right people saw what they needed to. Screenshots of invoices, audit reports with just enough red ink, anonymous tips to journalists who'd been hungry for a scandal. It didn't take much. Ryan's reputation had always been built on the illusion of perfection. All I had to do was fracture it once, the rest shattered on its own. By Friday, his company's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Mismanagement, fraud, betrayal. 3 words that once would have sounded absurd next to Ryan's face now followed him everywhere online. But it wasn't the headlines that destroyed him. It was the silence that followed. Calls stopped coming. People he'd known for years suddenly didn't have time. His inbox filled with cancellations. The world that once orbited him simply drifted away. I watched it all unfold like someone studying the aftermath of an earthquake. You expect it to feel triumphant, to stand over the ruins and feel vindicated. But instead, it felt eerily quiet. There's a strange emptiness in revenge. You imagine fireworks, but what you really get is silence, the kind that makes your own heartbeat sound too loud. Still, I didn't stop. I couldn't. I'd come too far to leave anything undone. I wanted him to know it was me. Not right away, but eventually. That's part of what makes revenge complete. Not just destruction, but recognition. So, I left him a message. Simple, clean, and final. You once told me loyalty was for the naive. I just proved you right. I sent it from an untraceable account. I knew he'd recognize my style, the phrasing, the punctuation. We'd built a business together. He knew my tone like his own reflection. That was the point. It wasn't about anonymity anymore. It was about the slow, chilling realization that the man who had trusted him most had been the one pulling the strings all along. He didn't reply. But 2 hours later, his profile photo disappeared from every platform. Then his phone went dark. The next day, word spread that he'd left the city. No one knew where he went. Some said Europe. Some said he checked into rehab. A few whispered about something darker. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. There's a limit to how much control you should have over another person's ending. Weeks passed. I went back to work, to routine, to pretending the world had balanced itself again. But revenge changes you. It's not a victory. It's a mirror. It forces you to look at the worst parts of yourself and realize you didn't destroy them, you simply gave them purpose. Sometimes, when I drive past that same office building at night, I still see his shadow in the reflection, hands gripping the steering wheel, face lit by the pale glow of failure. And even though I got everything I wanted, there's a quiet question that never leaves me. If the man I was betrayed me once, and the man I became destroyed him, which one of us really won? That's the kind of thought that keeps you up at night. Not guilt, not regret, just the echo of the moment you realize that revenge, like love, leaves scars on both sides of the blade. Months passed before I heard Ryan's name again. By then, the storm had already cleared, at least publicly. His company was absorbed by another firm. His assets frozen. His name erased from the website, the board, the building. It was as if he had never existed. But ghosts have a way of lingering in the places they helped build. And one night, that ghost came back to me. It was almost midnight when I got the message. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. You won. Are you proud? I stared at the screen for a long time, my hand frozen above the keyboard. I didn't need to ask who it was. There was only one person who could write something like that, sharp, surgical. Ryan had always known how to cut with words, and somehow, even now, he'd found a way to make me bleed again. I didn't reply. Not right away. Instead, I poured myself a drink, sat by the window, and watched the city lights flicker like dying stars. For the first time in months, I felt something like emptiness. Revenge wasn't supposed to feel like this. It was supposed to bring peace, closure, maybe even satisfaction. But all it brought was silence and a reflection I barely recognized. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to the coast. No phone, no plan. Just me and that endless stretch of highway. I kept thinking about everything I'd done, the manipulation, the traps, the lies stacked like dominoes waiting to fall. I had justified it all in the name of justice. But what if justice had only been an excuse? What if I just wanted to see him fall because I couldn't stand how much of myself I saw in him? We'd both been driven by ambition, ego, hunger. The difference was, he betrayed me for power. I destroyed him for pride. Different motives, same sin. At the ocean's edge, I finally opened my laptop. I hadn't planned to, but something pulled me there. Curiosity, maybe, or guilt. I checked that old email account, the one I'd used to set everything in motion. There were dozens of unread messages, news alerts, investigations. One in particular caught my eye. Former CEO found dead in Lisbon apartment, a suicide suspected. The article was short, detached, clinical, but one detail made my stomach turn. He'd left a note. A single line, no signature, no explanation. Some debts can't be paid in money. I closed the laptop. The sound of the waves drowned out everything else, but my heart was pounding too loud to ignore. I wanted to feel relief, to tell myself this was justice, the natural end of his choices. But I didn't. What I felt was colder. He'd taken the one thing I didn't expect him to with ending. He made himself the final act. For days, I tried to move on. I buried myself in work, avoided mirrors, avoided thoughts. But the truth gnawed at me like rust beneath steel. I hadn't just destroyed Ryan. I'd become him, calculated, heartless, efficient. One evening, as I was locking up the office, I saw my reflection in the glass door, the same confidence, the same emptiness, the same hunger. I laughed quietly, almost bitterly. It hit me then, Ryan hadn't just lost. He'd infected me with the very thing I hated in him. That's when I knew what I had to do. I wrote a confession. Not to the police, not to the media, just to myself. Every step, every lie, every moment I crossed the line. I sealed it in an envelope and left it on my desk. A reminder, a warning. You can win the war and still lose your soul. That night, I drove back to the coast. The air was heavy with fog, the kind that blurs the world until it feels unreal. I walked down to the water's edge, tossed my phone into the waves, and let the ocean swallow it whole. For the first time, I felt free, not from Ryan, not from revenge, but from the noise that had lived inside me since the day he betrayed me. The tide washed over my feet, cold, cleansing, final. I whispered into the dark. Though I didn't expect an answer, you were right, Ryan. Loyalty is for the naive. But maybe forgiveness is for the brave. Then I turned around and walked away, not as the man who had been wronged, or the man who had won, but as someone trying to remember who he was before vengeance became his purpose. The sea behind me was silent, but I swear I could almost hear him laughing, faint, distant, like an echo carried by the wind. And for the first time, I didn't hate the sound. The price of revenge, I realized, is never paid by one person alone. It's a shared debt, one that never really ends, even when the story does.